What if I told you that one of the most iconic dishes in the world wasn't born out of culinary genius, but out of necessity? Prepare to have your mind blown as we uncover the astonishing truth behind sushi's accidental birth, a story that began not in a bustling Tokyo restaurant, but with a humble technique designed for one purpose: keeping fish from rotting in the tropical heat. To trace sushi's earliest ancestors, we travel back over 2,000 years to the rice plains and river systems of Southeast Asia, the Mekong, the Irrawaddy, and the communities that lived along their fertile banks. Here, freshwater fish were abundant, but preserving them through months of monsoon humidity was a battle for survival. The solution they created was brilliantly simple. Pack cleaned fish in layers of salt and cooked rice, then leave it for months to ferment. The rice wasn't meant to be eaten. It was a biochemical shield, drawing out moisture and slowly souring into a powerful preservative. What emerged was the ancient ancestor of sushi, narezushi. Inside these tightly packed jars or clay pots, lactic acid bacteria got to work. As the rice fermented, acidity rose, harmful microbes died off, and the fish transformed. Its aroma intensified, its texture softened, and its shelf life extended for months. In a world without refrigeration, this was nothing short of a technological breakthrough. But let's be clear, early narezushi was nothing like today's delicate sushi. It was pungent, sour, even cheese-like. A survival food, not a refined delicacy. Yet this bold taste carried the signature of something the world would one day obsess over: umami. From these early communities, the technique traveled north into southern China, where written records from the 2nd century mention salted and rice-preserved fish known as sa. Traders and migrating rice farmers soon carried the method across the sea, into the Japanese archipelago. Why did this method spread so widely? Because it solved universal problems: too much fish during harvest season, too little salt in many regions, and no reliable way to store protein through harsh climates. Fermentation was equal parts necessity, ingenuity, and luck. These humble preservation jars from Southeast Asia planted the seeds of a food culture that would someday reshape global cuisine. Because once this technique reached Japan, something extraordinary happened. People didn't just preserve the fish, they began to eat the rice too. And that single shift would set sushi on a new path entirely. When wet rice farming finally reached the Japanese islands during the Yayoi period, it didn't arrive alone. Along with rice seeds and new tools came a powerful technique from the Asian mainland: preserving fish by fermenting it in rice. In Japan, this foreign method would slowly transform from survival technology into the foundation of an entire food culture. By the 8th and 9th centuries, this fermented fish had climbed all the way to the top of society. Imperial law codes and court manuals mention foods written with the characters buji and fud, salty, rice-preserved fish presented as tax, tribute, and imperial gifts. Sushi's ancestor was not street food yet. It was a formal offering worthy of the emperor's table. At first, the Japanese followed the same logic as in China and Southeast Asia. The rice was just a tool. Fish was buried in salted rice for months, then dug out and eaten, while the sour, broken-down rice was thrown away. For inland regions far from the sea, this fish pickle was a lifeline, turning river and lake catches into food that could last through long winters. Around Lake Biwa, Japan's largest freshwater lake, a particularly famous version emerged: funazushi. Local carp were salted, packed into barrels, weighed down with stones, and left to ferment, sometimes for years. The result was intensely sour, cheese-like slices of fish that some people still make today using methods that have barely changed since medieval times. Then, during the Muromachi period, something subtle but revolutionary happened. Instead of fermenting fish for months until the rice dissolved, people began shortening the process, just days or weeks, and serving fish together with the still edible, only lightly soured rice. For the first time, sushi was no longer just preserved fish. It was a dish, fish and rice eaten as one. Why the shift? Rice in medieval Japan was precious. It was tax, currency, and status. Letting it dissolve around fish and then throwing it away was a luxury fewer and fewer people could afford. At the same time, people had acquired a taste for the tangy, umami-rich rice itself. With the help of sake lees and other starters to speed fermentation, cooks discovered they could have the flavor of narezushi without the long wait and without the waste. As these half-fermented styles spread, narezushi began to shift socially too. It remained prestigious enough for imperial kitchens and gift exchanges, but it also crept into the everyday diets of towns and villages. In some regions, it was still a luxury. In others, a practical way to stretch each catch of freshwater fish, a bridge between elite cuisine and ordinary survival food. By the end of the Muromachi era, Japan had taken a foreign preservation trick and turned it into something uniquely its own: fermented fish and rice, eaten together. The next step would be even more radical. What happens when you strip away most of the fermentation, add vinegar instead of thyme, and drop sushi into the chaos of a booming city called Edo? That's where our story goes next. By the early Edo period, Japan was changing fast, and so was its food. In the crowded streets of Edo, people no longer had the patience to wait weeks for fish to ferment. Rice vinegar offered a shortcut. Mix it into freshly cooked rice with a little salt and sugar, and in minutes the grain tasted like it had been aging for days. This hayazushi, or fast sushi, was the first step towards sushi as instant street food. There was just one problem. Vinegar had to be affordable and abundant. Enter Matazaemon Nakano, a sake maker who in the early 1800s began turning leftover sake lees into a rich reddish vinegar called akasu. His innovation slashed costs and flooded Edo with vinegar, giving sushi vendors a cheap, flavorful way to season rice quickly. Without Nakano's barrels of vinegar, Edo-style sushi might never have taken off. Now picture Edo at its peak, one of the largest cities on Earth, buzzing with merchants, craftsmen, and travelers. At night, the streets lit up with yatai, portable food stalls serving soba, tempura, and increasingly, sushi. Workers wanted something fast, filling, and easy to eat standing up. The city itself was hungry for a new kind of convenience food. In the early 1800s, a sushi craftsman named Hanaya Yohei pushed the idea further. Instead of pressing sushi into boxes or rolls, he shaped small mounds of vinegared rice by hand and topped them with thin slices of fresh or lightly cured fish. These bite-sized pieces, nigiri sushi, could be made in seconds and eaten in one motion. Sushi was no longer a slow preparation. It was Edo-made fast food. Yohei began by carrying trays of his new sushi through the streets, then opened a stall and eventually a shop. Demand exploded. By the 1830s, nigiri had become so popular and so closely tied to luxury eating that authorities targeted sushi shops during crackdowns on excess success. When the hard times passed, Edo's love for nigiri came back even stronger, spreading the style across Japan. Edo nigiri, though, didn't look exactly like what we see today. Each piece was roughly 3 times bigger, dressed with less vinegar and almost no sugar. The rice was often tinted and flavored with dark akasu, and the fish was rarely served completely raw. It might be marinated in soy, salted, lightly grilled, or simmered. This was sushi engineered for flavor, safety, and speed in a time before refrigeration. Socially, nigiri belonged to the chonin, the urban middle class of merchants and craftsmen, who grabbed a few pieces at the counter before hurrying back to work or pleasure districts. Yet its appeal leaked upwards. Even stories about shoguns enjoying local Edo fish hint that this people's fast food was hard for the elite to resist. Watching a skilled itamae form perfect nigiri in seconds became part of the entertainment. By the end of the Edo period, sushi had fully adapted to the rhythm of a fast, crowded city. Quick to make, quick to eat, and packed with flavor. The age of long fermentation was over. The age of vinegar and velocity had begun. From this point on, every new chapter in sushi's story, from modern Tokyo counters to conveyor belts and global chains, would build on the blueprint created in Edo's streets. Modern sushi didn't just appear in a fancy Tokyo restaurant, it rode in on ice and steel. After the Meiji Restoration, Japan's new ice factories, cold storage, and railways meant fresh fish could finally travel far beyond the ports. What once had to be eaten right by the sea could now show up hours later on a dinner table in a snowy mountain village as sushi. Then came the shock of World War II. Rice was rationed, food was scarce, and many sushi shops simply disappeared. Some tried to fake sushi with sweet potatoes instead of rice, but for most people, sushi became a memory, a taste associated with better times, not everyday life. In the 1950s and 60s, Japan's post-war economic boom rewrote the script. As salaries rose and cities grew, sushi quietly returned, not as an elite luxury, but as an occasional treat families could share. The new middle class didn't want sushi only for ceremonies. They wanted it on Saturday nights with their kids. But one Osaka restaurateur, Yoshiaki Shiraishi, faced a problem. His tiny sushi shop was always short on staff. A visit to a beer factory gave him a wild idea. If bottles could move past workers on a conveyor belt, why not plates of sushi past customers? He spent years tinkering with speed and layout, chasing a simple goal: make sushi flow on its own. In 1958, he opened the first kaiten sushi, conveyor belt sushi, in Osaka. Plates of nigiri circled the counter at exactly 8 centimeters per second, just slow enough to tempt, just fast enough to stay fresh. Customers loved the game of watching, waiting, and grabbing the perfect plate. Labor costs dropped, prices fell, and for the first time, sushi started to feel truly affordable. The real explosion came after Expo 70 in Osaka, where conveyor belt sushi was shown off to the world. Once Shirayashi's patent expired, big chains rushed in, filling Japan with brightly lit kaiten sushi shops. Fixed prices per plate, sometimes as low as 100 yen, turned sushi into a casual family outing. For millions of workers and school kids, sushi night became no more exotic than going out for burgers. Today, two sushi worlds coexist in Japan. On one side, massive chains like Kura Sushi or Sushiro serve hundreds of millions of plates a year on spinning belts. Cheap, playful, and family-friendly. On the other, tiny counters run by masters like Jiro Ono offer meticulously crafted omakase menus that can cost a small fortune. Both, in their own way, are heirs to Edo's nigiri and Shirayashi's conveyor dream. From ice factories to conveyor belts, modern Japan turned sushi from a city-side treat into an everyday habit, a kind of Japanese fast food that still carries centuries of technique and taste. But the story doesn't stop at Japan's shores. Once sushi could be mass-produced, branded, and exported, it was only a matter of time before it jumped oceans and started changing in Los Angeles, New York, and beyond, which is where our journey heads next. When World War II ended, Japan didn't just export cars and electronics to the West, it exported culture. American soldiers, diplomats, and journalists got their first glimpse of sushi in post-war Japan, and many of them were shocked. Raw fish on rice didn't look like food in the way they were used to. But for a curious few, it became a strange new obsession they couldn't stop talking about when they went back home. The real turning point came in 1966 in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo. A long-running Japanese restaurant called Kawafuku added something unusual to its second floor, a proper sushi bar. Master Chef Shigeo Saito sliced nigiri and sashimi right in front of customers while his wife, the only server, gently explained what they were eating. At first, it was mostly Japanese businessmen and well-traveled elites, but soon, Hollywood insiders started whispering, "There's a place in Little Tokyo where you can eat raw fish, and it's incredible." By the late 1960s, sushi bars began to appear in San Francisco and New York. Places like Restaurant Nippon attracted diplomats, journalists, artists, the kind of people who collected unusual experiences. Sushi wasn't just something you ate, it was a story you told. Ordering nigiri in Manhattan or sipping sake over sashimi in San Francisco became a quiet way of saying, "I'm worldly, I'm in on something new." There was just one problem. Most Americans still weren't ready for seaweed and raw tuna. So in the early 1970s, a Los Angeles chef named Ichiro Mashita tweaked the formula. He swapped hard-to-find fatty tuna for creamy avocado, added cooked crab, and then did something radical. He flipped the roll inside out. Rice on the outside, nori hidden on the inside. The California roll was born, with no raw fish, soft textures, and familiar flavors. It was less intimidating, more Instagram-worthy, decades before Instagram existed.
By the late 1970s, sushi sat in a sweet spot between status and wellness.
On screen, rich characters sealed business deals over sushi in sleek restaurants, cementing its image as an exotic luxury. At the same time, a new wave of low-fat, low-calorie dieting hit cities like Los Angeles. Suddenly, raw fish and rice sounded like the perfect clean meal. Magazine covers praised sushi as both mysterious and good for you, a rare combination that made it very hard to resist.
In the early 1980s, the sushi boom was impossible to ignore.
Sushi bars popped up not just in Los Angeles and New York, but in London and Paris. Supermarkets started selling neat plastic trays of rolls and nigiri for office workers on their lunch break. TV chefs showed viewers how to mix wasabi into soy sauce and slice perfect avocado fans. What started as a niche curiosity was turning into a full-blown food trend. As sushi spread, communities reshaped it. Jewish Americans embraced fish-based sushi as a kosher-friendly option. In Philadelphia, a Japanese chef mixed cream cheese and smoked salmon into the Philadelphia roll. On the U.S. West Coast, Mexican and Central American chefs added spicy mayo and jalapenos, sparking the fusion styles to come. Meanwhile, in Europe, early hotel sushi bars introduced London and Paris to this new Japanese chic. By 1980, sushi had become part of Western city life, from power lunches to supermarket shelves. And once it took root, every country began reshaping it. Cream cheese rolls in Brazil, deep-fried sushi burritos in Mexico. Sushi was going global and becoming local at the same time. By the 1980s, sushi had gone global, but not unchanged. Each country twisted it to local taste. Cream cheese in the US, tropical fruit in Brazil, foie gras in France, jalapenos in Mexico. The core stayed Japanese. The flavor became proudly local. In the US, sushi went big and loud. California, Philadelphia, spider and rainbow rolls turned sushi into something larger, creamier, and crunchier. Less quiet minimalism, more bold, over-the-top flavor. Brazil, with its huge Japanese community, turned sushi tropical and sweet. Salmon with mango, passion fruit sauces, strawberry and kiwi toppings. The star is the deep-fried hot roll. Stuffed with fish and cream cheese, crispy outside, molten inside. In Europe, sushi slipped into fine dining. French chefs added foie gras and truffle. Italians used balsamic, mozzarella, and prosciutto. Scandinavians folded in smoked salmon and Nordic flavors. Black rice and quinoa rolls tied sushi to European health trends. Mexico turned up the heat. In places like Sinaloa, Mexican sushi means giant breaded rolls, deep-fried, topped with melted cheese and jalapenos, sometimes wrapped in tortillas, ancestors of today's global sushi burrito. In the Middle East, sushi was adapted to halal rules, no alcohol, seasonings, careful seafood choices. Then chefs got playful. Falafel rolls and vine leaves, tahini and hummus-style toppings, and in rich Gulf cities, even gold leaf nigiri as status symbols. Sushi also fused with other cuisines. In Peru and Brazil, Japanese migrants helped create Nikkei, ceviche-style flavors with Japanese technique. Hawaii turned sushi parts into poke bowls. Korea's gimbap looked like maki but tasted Korean. Chefs like Nobu built empires on this fusion. Today, sushi lives two parallel lives: cheap trays in supermarkets, airports, and viral sushi burritos, and sacred slow omakase at tiny counters in Tokyo. Between them lies the global story of sushi, a dish that went global, adapted, and still somehow stayed itself. In the 21st century, sushi is about more than flavor. It's about umami as a global fifth taste. the Bluefin tuna crisis that shook luxury, and a new question over every plate: can sushi have a future without damaging the planet? In 1908, chemist Kikunai Ikeda studied dashi and isolated glutamate crystals from kombu, naming their deep savoriness umami. He turned it into a kitchen seasoning, MSG, launched as Ajinomoto in 1909, linking Japanese cooking and modern food science.
MSG spread across East Asia, but in the West it was plagued by myths like Chinese restaurant syndrome. Decades later, research and the discovery of umami receptors helped confirm umami as the fifth basic taste, the same savoriness found in tomatoes, parmesan, and broths. Once science validated umami, brands and chefs amplified it. Umami, the fifth taste. Western cooks realized their tomato sauce, parmesan, and aged steak were umami bombs. For sushi, this language named the pleasure of fatty tuna, soy sauce, and rice melting together. Bluefin tuna, especially fatty toro, became sushi's ultimate luxury, and wild stocks paid the price. From the 1970s to about 2010, Atlantic and Mediterranean bluefin dropped by an estimated 70 to 80%, forcing quotas, trade debates, and a hard look at what luxury costs. Out of crisis came sustainable sushi. Guides flagged bluefin and eel as species to avoid. Some restaurants dropped them. Meanwhile, tech offered alternatives: closed-cycle farms, plant-based tuna, lab-grown fish, even invasive species on menus, shifting the goal to great sushi without wrecking the ocean. As sushi globalized, questions of ownership followed. Purists reject cream cheese rolls as not real. Others worry about appropriation by non-Japanese chefs. Yet Japanese cuisine itself borrowed tempura and curry. Today, some top sushi chefs are Mexican, Korean, or European, and most diners judge by respect and taste, not passports. Sushi's future sits between robots and old masters. Japan already has machines shaping nigiri, labs growing fish cells, and vegan rolls built from plants, while tiny Tokyo counters still serve hand-formed fish on warm rice. From survival food to global luxury, sushi now asks, how do we keep both taste and tomorrow on the same plate?